Tremendous healing takes place in a dark room retreat. Pinoline released in the brain. You get 5-MeO-DMT. Then you can start to see ultraviolet light and infrared. What I would like to use as a new term really is spirit science.
It's a lot of language that you've used that, if I'm honest with you, I don't fully understand. None of that makes sense to me.
My PhD is in quantum morphogenetic physics, and most people are rather pleased that I pronounce that rather than the fact that I need to pronounce it.
Absolutely. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
It is, and it usually goes in one ear and out the other because people don't understand what it is. So let me just quickly, in 2 or 3 sentences, explain that really quantum morphogenetic physics is understanding our true cosmic history. In other words, remembering who we are, understanding our multidimensional anatomy, also the multidimensional anatomy of our DNA, that it's not just to do with the color of your eyes or the color of your hair, or what you got from your parents. It really is a transmitter and receiver of consciousness. So it's reawakens and stirs the memory for us to know who we truly are as humans. And that memory was something we were always meant to have, and it's been forgotten, it's been buried. So that's what my degree is in. And my thesis for my PhD was bioregenesis of the DNA blueprint through source feeding. So our DNA has been distorted over millennia. Source feeding is finding ways to nourish yourself in ways other than just what we've been told and taught, which is the food that we eat. And as you know, much of the food that we eat, it's hard push to call it food these days because there's so many additives and toxins. So that was where I sort of delved in a little deeply into different experiences with that. My background also goes into NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which I like to describe as the user manual for your mind, understanding why we do what we do, or rather than just why, how we do what we do. So I'm also a master trainer of hypnosis, timeline therapy.
Interesting. So there is so much there, if you don't mind, that I'd really like to unpick because so my audience are pretty similar to me. We are sort of women nearing 40s all the way up to sort of 60s, and we are not scientific. And there's a lot of language that you've used that, if I'm honest with you, I don't fully understand. And what I would really love for you to explain a little bit in, and I'm going to say layman's terms, because you talk about, and if I'm correct, if my understanding is correct by what you've said, the work that you do is understanding who we are as people, as humans, and how we've evolved throughout our lives and what things have affected us throughout our lives to create who we are now. But the work is all about stripping all of that back and understanding where we've come from and who we are truly meant to be. Is that correct?
Let me put it in even simpler terms. You are correct. So I like to think of it as taking people beyond the boundaries of who they believe themselves to be and open up to new possibilities. So to me, that encapsulates everything that I do, going beyond the boundaries. Because if you think about it, from the moment we're born, we're given a name, we're placed into a religion, we're handed a script and a set of beliefs, we're sent to school and taught a history that may or may not be true. We're also tested on that history that we're taught. And if we get it right, we end up as the star of the class. And if we don't, then we're sort of labeled maybe the dunce of the class. And that can stay with us for our whole life as a limiting belief that, again, places us in a very limited boundary. It's like having water in a glass or in a bottle or a container, and being able to remove the container so you see that you're the bird out of the cage.
I absolutely love all of that because that's exactly what I sort of speak to my clients about as a coach. So we're pretty aligned on the work that we're doing, but it's just in a different format, if I'm correct. So yours is approaching it in a scientific way, whereas mine is obviously approaching it in more of an emotional thought process way. It's interesting because you talk about emotional intelligence, and I know that you have been on some very interesting retreats. You took part in a 10-day 10-night dark room retreat, which surely must have led you through quite an emotional journey. How does that connect with the scientific coaching that you do?
Okay, so I wouldn't say I'm predominantly scientific. What
Okay.
I would like to use as a new term really is spirit science, and
Okay.
bringing them both together. You know, so with NLP, it's, really understanding how we operate. However, we have to understand that we're more than this physical form, and there's the emotions, there's the nervous system. But of course, we can't really prove anything exists outside of ourselves, because
Mm,
our entire reality is built on our nervous system and our five senses: what we see, what we hear. So when you take those away, as I did in the dark room,
mm,
and it's a phenomenal experience. And I do think there needs to be, with some of these experiences, there needs to be a certain emotional maturity to be able to handle them. Again, we go back to childhood conditioning and programming, and we've been taught light is good, dark is bad. And dark is when all the bad things happen, and light is when all the good things happen. So again, it's this right, wrong, good, bad, this duality that we've been placed in, and nothing could be further from the truth. But I'll be honest with you, Lisa, probably until about 10, 15 years ago, I always slept with a nightlight.
mm.
Always. Had a
Wow.
very,
Okay.
very healthy fear of the dark. And particularly as a child, I was afraid of the sort of, the man under the bed or the man in the cupboard kind of thing. And many people do have a distinct fear of the dark. So when you go into this dark room retreat, and literally you have a few hours to sort of familiarize yourself with where you've placed things, where the toilet is, where the shower is.
If you are enjoying this episode of Real Women's Stories, why not follow or subscribe so you don't miss another episode? And we've got some incredible episodes that we've already recorded and that you can listen back to.
Tremendous healing takes place in a dark room retreat, because the first thing that happens is you sleep a lot, because melatonin gets flooding your system when you're in the dark, pitch black. And this is the reason that we should sleep in complete darkness, is that huge amounts of melatonin get released, and melatonin is involved in the repair of DNA in your body. So it
Mhm.
goes through massive shifts and massive repair. Then, the longer you stay in the dark room, different things start to happen. So on day 3, you get something usually around day 3, called pinoline released in the brain. This is responsible for lucid dreaming. So you have more vivid dreams. Then, if you stay longer, you get 5-MeO DMT until you get full blown DMT, which many people will know is what happens when you have a maybe plant medicine experience. It's almost a psychedelic experience. And I do remember it felt like, there was a disco ball in my room. And of course, there's no light, you have no devices, nothing. And that's why I say this place is purpose built, because even if you go to a hotel these days, there's, those little red markers or red lights. It's very hard. You can spend half an hour trying to turn off all the lights in a hotel room these days. If you stay even longer, like 15 days, then what you'll find is you can start to see ultraviolet light and infrared. You begin to see people's energy field. So you begin to navigate yourself around a little bit more easily. So I thought I might be scared in the dark, but actually, there was a warmth and a nourishment in the darkness that I didn't expect. And it's incredible how quickly humans can adapt. What was also so powerful, like a rebirth, was coming out of that experience. And we came out at sunset, so it wasn't so bright on the eyes, and we all had special glasses on, so it didn't impact us. But as we went out, everybody went in that direction. I actually went the other direction, and it links back to the emotional intelligence and the emotional body. I felt so emotional. I felt so emotional. It really was like a rebirth. It was a tremendous experience. But that was my experience. Whereas other
Mm,
people, you know, sometimes trauma happens in the dark. And
yeah.
so it can be a very powerful trigger that allows people to confront that trauma. And
Wow.
this
That
is the
sounds,
reason that facilitating an experience like that rather than just leaving people shut in a room is
yeah,
important to keep
yeah,
people safe.
absolutely. That sounds terrifying, fascinating. Um, I think, and I certainly couldn't cope with that. I mean, I definitely wouldn't be able to do it. So that's something really powerful. And thank you very much for sharing. Obviously, I was drawn to you. I don't particularly think or speak in a highly, I would say, academic way. But I do class myself as a very intelligent woman. If anybody was listening to this, because obviously we've got my listeners, and I do think that, as you just said, people are a magnet to me, and somebody did want to work with you, what would you say to them about the work that you do, and how they could feel aligned to the work you do in terms of, you know, speaking as a real woman, real talk, real language, which you've kindly obviously shared and done during this obviously interview. But what would you say to anybody who's really interested in the work that you're doing and would like to feel aligned to you and would like to feel that magnetic pull to understand the work that you're doing and what they would get out of it?
So, one of the things that I find people need early on is to see what's tripping them up.
Okay.
So, we've talked about being in the dark room. Sometimes we're floundering around in the dark and the same thing keeps happening. We feel in the same story, the same loop. So, I've already shared it's about changing that backstory. So, often when we look at what we want, we look from past to present to future. So I tend to do it in reverse. So work from the future, bring it back to now, and what backstory is going to support you to be this person now to get to that trajectory. All right. The other thing is to switch the light on. So if you're in the dark, to switch the light on. And usually in the first session, it's I'm able to get the distortion patterns, the sabotage patterns in an hour and a quarter. And you actually, I get the person actually highlights them, but they're not realizing that they're doing that. But isn't that valuable where, I can hold up this mirror and go, so now you know what's tripping you up and
Mm,
get that out because as you know sometimes we can spend hours, years, weeks, months digging around for that root cause. That it's like the keystone. If you have an arch, you can pull this stone, the arch still stands. You can pull that stone, the arch still stands. But there's one stone that if you pull it, everything collapses. And so it is with people's challenges. There's usually something that when you pull it, everything collapses. And so getting those sabotage patterns up front really quickly, it's like, now I know what's tripping me up. And getting
mm,
people back on the course side of the equation that we are far from helpless. And so bringing everything back to yourself, for what purpose have I created this, puts you back in the driver's seat. And then the other work that I do is with the multidimensional field scans, which also, from a bigger perspective, can show you ancestral loops karmic patterns, again, other issues or stories where you're tripping yourself up. But it can also open you up to other timelines.
Mm.
Timelines are, some people may be calling them parallel lives. Um, there's a wonderful series on, I think it's Apple, called Dark Matter. And it again, although it's science based, but it's also spirit based, they're opening different doors. And wouldn't it be lovely to be in a sphere where there's 360 degrees of possibility, 360 doors, but you get the opportunity to open that door and go, oh, let's have a look. Do I like the trajectory of that timeline? Maybe not. Let me open this so that you get the chance to have a peek. And also with the multidimensional field scans, they show maybe an optimal timeline, one that's really good for you. Now, the next stage is going back to where you are now, which is an energy field, a particular playground, your script, your story that's given you the part that you're playing now. And then this maybe new optimal timeline carries a different energy, maybe has a different story, and you want to get there. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could just slap you there? But unfortunately, when you just slap people there into new frequencies or new energy fields, they can feel off balance.
Do you feel that you're aligned with the timeline of where you would like to be? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Now, it can also take a while because we live in a space time reality where there's time and space before something actually happens in the physical realm. Are you with me on this? That when you have a thought or an idea, it doesn't manifest instantly, which, quite frankly, Lisa, is probably a good thing. Because can you imagine with all our scattered thoughts and it manifested immediately, you'd be going, oh, didn't mean that. Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. I can understand that. And I'm pleased you said, am I with you? Because at one point I was like, oh, this is all going a little bit over my head because, but I think and I'm just going to reflect back. So anyone listening to
yes,
this, that what you're saying is that the who we are right now, your field scan, and I did the field scan, was that you took some information from me about my thought pattern and you asked me a number of questions which related to how I felt, how I was feeling at the time, how I felt about certain situations. I think, if I remember, I can't remember the questions. And then from the answers that I give you, you could identify how I was creating myself in the moment, but also if I was on the right trajectory and the right timeline for myself at this precise moment in time, and then what I could then almost produce, or I'm going to say create, moving forward, at what pace, at what, and at specific times, and I'm going to say milestones, but is that
yes,
correct? Have I
yes.
explained that? Yes.
Yes, and what I'm also saying is that where you are now is the result of the story. And most people have a story that when you ask them, oh, I had this happen to me, that happened to me, they're still living that. And of course, the past doesn't really exist. We have to recreate it in the now, which means you're bringing something that might or might not have happened back into your field now.
Because you talk about DNA, but DNA for me is about taking blood samples, or having a look at physically how I'm created, not mentally how I'm created. So how does that how does the scan work?
Okay, so first, DNA. So with DNA, imagine a big treasure chest and you're given a key. But when you get the key and open the treasure chest, it opens only a very small portion of the treasure chest. That's the DNA that you know.
Right.
The rest is the DNA that you don't know, and it's what mainstream science refers to as junk DNA. I prefer to call it intron DNA because within that intron means potential and possibility,
Okay.
lies your potential to be more, to see more, to hear more, to understand more. It goes back to that metaphor of the torch in the dark warehouse, lighting it up so your client becomes aware of more. And this is where you start to become aware that your DNA is more than just the color of your eyes or the shape of your face. It's a transmitter and receiver of consciousness. Think of consciousness like information, awareness. So if your awareness is the size of a tennis ball, then when you read the book, that's your level of understanding. When you see the movie, it's the size
Mm.
of the tennis ball. But if you can expand that tennis ball to the size of a beach ball, then when you read the book, when you wake up in the morning, when you watch the movie, more understanding, more expansion. So rather than, again, keeping us in this container, we start to evolve and explore and become more than we thought we could be. And DNA is at the heart of this because it's a transmitter and receiver of energy, of consciousness. So when you repair your DNA, and there's strands that are associated with the mental level, the emotional level, the physical level, then your whole world starts to open up in a new way. So, how do the multidimensional field scans work? Well, the reason that I've been a seeker and searcher, Lisa, is basically because I was always curious for people who were clairvoyant or psychic or clairaudient. And I had some incredible teachers who obviously saw something in me that I didn't see, didn't get, and I used to feel like a right fraud. But I still went, and have a healthy degree of skepticism as well. I it takes quite a lot to impress me. But I had friends who we'd be meditating or something and go, "Ah, did you see that? Did you hear that?" And I'd go, "No." But what I discovered was my gift is more of a instant knowing. Because if you go for a normal read, not a normal reading, a clairvoyant reading or psychic reading, they're seeing images or hearing sounds, but they're translating it through their own perception. Their own, it's like wearing glasses, how they see the world.
Yeah.
So, first of all, with the multidimensional scans, it doesn't work like that. I do not need to be with the person live. In fact, I cannot do it live. I may be able to do that later down the line, but I prefer to get the information, and that's also why I then produce a written report, which acts like a memory activation for people. When they read it, they should go, hmm. But it's coded as well in the words because words hold energy and frequency. So I go into a particular state and I act as a reflection of that which is already in your field at the multidimensional level, which is why many people say, oh, it feels familiar, because this is what is in your field that you're maybe not aware of right now. So I'm just bringing it back into your conscious awareness. And the field scan goes into 15 different areas. We go into your evolutionary path, karmic blocks, ancestral blocks, your energy signature, optimal timelines, embodiment level. Again, things that you might not see. I've sort of got a list of your chakra alignment from the 12 system chakra, your current mission blocks, so many different areas. And also based on the questions, how you've responded to them, I can mirror back other things. Now, I can only mirror that which is there. And so some people have a lot of, sometimes I check for mental clutter, mental loops, where we're running the same mental thoughts which are maybe blocking clarity. So often people want to know purpose or they've reached a certain trajectory in their life but want to take a different path.
We need to really, some people may be thinking about, what you said and gone, none of that makes sense to me. you're not a clairvoyant, you're not a medium, but you're putting yourself into a state where you're not using your own perception, putting on those glasses, from the answers, from the questions you ask. People give you their answers, and based on their answers, you're going to provide a non-judgmental,
Mirror.
completely disopinionated, yes, mirror of what they've said. How do you get into that state? And also the responses that you provide, how do you collate all of those responses without it sounding completely overwhelming?
Again, it's mirroring, not reading, and running it through my own perception.
Thank you so much for obviously, allowing me to ask you that question. Look, I was so
Welcome those
intrigued.
devil's advocate questions.
Yeah.
Ask away. I told you, high degree of skepticism.
Yeah. No, and I was a little skeptical, which is the reason why I asked you to do the field scan on me. And I'm happy for us to really just quickly touch upon some of the results of the field scan.
If I recall, and as I said, I don't hold anybody's field scan in my field after they're done. I close their field, I close mine, because one of the most important things, Lisa, is I have to have permission. And when I've had people ask for other people, it's like, no, I have to have direct permission. That is my own integrity and my own ethics on this. Is it tempting to want to look into somebody else's field? It could be, but you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. And I think you're with me on this. We spoke about this when we had a call a couple of weeks ago of, holding your what's right, what you will do, what you won't do. And so your scan did highlight an optimal timeline of stepping even into a bigger spotlight with what you're doing and with these podcasts and really not holding back on your voice and visibility. And so what's on the screen, we just looked at the karmic blocks, was there's a karmic vow of silence here.
Mm.
And when you understand that, I don't know whether that helped you understand why sometimes there's this push pull of
I
like,
think what
yes, yes, yes. And then it's like, ooh, ooh, ooh.
Yeah, I think one of the things when I saw that reminded me, it took me back to when I was younger, where I was told, and I think something says here, where I was told to be quiet. I was always told that I overshared, from a very young age, I think from like a teenager. And I would, I recall being around adults and sharing some of my life stories. And as a very young age, I went through a lot. And I was told by a friend that her mum found it very inappropriate the way that I was speaking, and that I was asked not to speak like that in front of people that we were around at that time. And that, for me, it's interesting how that was the pinnacle that came back to me when I realized, when I read vows of silence, and my timelines of it says where your voice was punished or dismissed. And I think that that was one of the memories I have. Upon, I think there was another one as well. So I think that's probably where I've got that. And it's not an anxiety. What would I say? It's more of a fear of forgetfulness, of stumbling across my words, of not being able to vocalize my thoughts and my feelings correctly. So that's probably where I'm holding back. And that's where I now understand that actually it's not true. I'm a 51-year-old woman, and I'm sharing stories on this podcast. And I think everybody should have a voice, no matter what their age is, even if they are 13 years old. If you have a thought, if you have an opinion, if you have an emotion, why shouldn't we share those emotions? Why shouldn't we speak? So that for me was very, very valuable to have read that within the scan. result, because I do believe that the work that you're doing is super interesting. And I, know that anybody that might look you up and maybe felt how I did when I first discovered you, this woman's fascinating. I'm curious, but I'm not quite understanding the language and the science behind it all. But now you've beautifully explained it, and quite literally and in real terms explained your work to my listeners. I really hope that they align with you, they resonate with what you're saying, because you're right in everything you say. We tell ourselves stories, and we are capable of much bigger things. We should be able to, understand the stories that we've told ourselves, why we've told ourselves those stories. But now we can actually take that information and step into a much bigger space that is ours to take. There's opportunity out there. Yes, there are challenges that we've had in our lives, but there is so much more that we can create and become throughout the rest of our lives.